Okay, we will start in a minute. Okay, and I'm turning the attendance on now. If you give me 15 seconds, it will be on. Okay. All right, the attendance is on now. Please sign in. I'll put the link to the class notes in the chat, although I don't want to do this every class, but I will do it now because I remembered. All right, and I think we'll start in 30 seconds. Oh. Okay, very good. Okay, welcome everyone. I realize we're sitting here in class as a hurricane bears down on our area. We should be thinking about our friends and classmates now. The most recent forecast suggests Houston, at least the central downtown area, will probably miss the bulk of the force, but our friends in Beaumont and Lake Charles and Port Arthur are not so fortunate. I know we have some of our own classmates are evacuating. They emailed me earlier today, so just keep them in mind. It's a strange thing, the Zoom University. In the past, when we had a storm, classes would just end and that was it. There was no discussion, and now we're able to more or less maintain classes, and those who miss it can watch the replay later. So it's a strange sort of scenario that we're sitting here learning while this massive storm is uprooting so many people. It's kind of a different thing. I'm not quite sure how this is going to work for tomorrow, but we should know by late tonight, early tomorrow, what the extent of this will be. Okay, any questions from you before I get started? I see Nancy has put a podcast for how to sell a haunted house from criminal on Apple Podcasts. Okay, I'll take the recommendation.
Would you live in a haunted house?
I don't care. It's actually so Clay, I appreciate the question. I used to ask this question. I say, raise your hand if you would buy a haunted house for a discount. And I have asked the question differently. Would you ever live in a haunted house? And one year there was a student and she went on this long story about how her house was haunted, how there was a murder there, and she was convinced and she saw spirits. And I'm like, I am not ever doing this again. I'm not asking this question. So I just am not asking it. But yeah, on the margin, I wouldn't care. I mean, people die in houses all the time. You just don't know about it. If it results in a lower price. Now, in this case, actually, there are people who wanted the house because it was haunted as like a money-making opportunity. So go figure. All right. Any other non-haunted house questions? We'll get to the haunted house later. I promise. It's a fun case. I would love one semester to teach this case on Halloween. It's just never fallen out that way. It's just too early in the semester. All right. If you click in the link in the chat to the notes, I put this up. It's right above Nancy's podcast link. The first thing you'll see is what they call a word cloud. What the word cloud is a way of quickly scanning through a lot of short answers to try to figure out what words are most common. And I'm going to try to use these today. The reason why I'm not using multiple choice questions is they're too easy to guess. And also, you can tell your friend in chat, it's C, it's B. And you know, so I'm trying to defeat that. So I actually like the short answer. Also, it forces you to use words to express yourself, which is the, I'm sorry, everyone. I sent the chat to the waiting room. Oh my God, I feel awful. I'm sorry, Marissa. You're exactly right. The Zoom does this weird thing where it doesn't send the chat to everyone. There we go. Okay, so anyway, I'll try it again. The first thing you'll see is this word cloud, which pulls together all the different words people use. By the way, you should be bringing up this document before I even send you the link. Just go to the class folder every day and click the link, and you'll be there. Okay. I reviewed your minute submissions very carefully, and those are surprisingly helpful. The reason why they're helpful is that not the same students, but groups of students tend to ask the same question. And that tells me that that's something I need to spend time on. If more than 2 people say the same thing, I'm like, okay, that's something I need to spend time on. So I want to focus on question number 5, which was the question 5 from last class. So let me just read it to you again. It's on the screen as well. So this was the question. It said, O, the owner of Blackacre, executes and delivers a deed of Blackacre to her daughter A as a gift. Okay. At that point, there's a valid transaction that complies with the statute of frauds. From O to daughter, right, from O to A is a gift. There's a deed. It's in writing. That's a valid transaction. The next sentence says the deed is not recorded. That does not matter. We have not done recording yet. We'll do recording later this semester, but I'll give you a preview. Between O and A, there's no need to record. The only purpose of recording is to put the broader community on notice of this transaction. But it's a perfectly valid transaction. At this point, A owns Blackacre. Okay, next sentence says, subsequently, O tells A that she would like Blackacre back. Well, she can do that. She can tell that. Doesn't really do anything. Next clause. A good daughter, hands the deed back to O and says, this land is yours again. What's the problem here? There's no writing. By saying this land is your land, you're not engaging in a writing, therefore there's no compliance with the statute of frauds. Next sentence, O tears up the deed. So what? That doesn't do anything. You need a writing that's signed to transfer property. Let's say your house burns down and your deed becomes ash. Does that mean you lose your house? Of course not. You can always request a replacement deed from the county. So who owns Blackacre? Here the answer remains the daughter, A. O does not get it back. Does that example make some sense to you? A couple of people asked about that exact question. I want to lead class off to clarify it. All right, any questions? Please raise your hand if you have any. No? Okay. All right, so let's start then. Another question. This is question number 1. It's a true false. And this is your question. The existence of a zoning ordinance renders a title unmarketable. True or false? The existence of a zoning ordinance renders a title unmarketable. True or false? And I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer that, please. Okay, so I'll stop it there. I got about 60 people. I think I just got everyone. Here we go. All right, so we got, oh, excellent. 95% of you put false. 5% of you put true, but that's pretty good in a class full of 60 people. Let me just summarize this point again. If you pull up the what do you call it? The case summary I wrote in it's for the Lohmeyer. I'm sorry, it's for the first case. I'm blanking on the name. But if you pull up the case notes from last class, the case summary, I put this little 2-sentence summary here, and let me just read it to you. I'll just copy in the chat, make it easier for your notes, but I'll put it right in the class document. Still figuring out the best way of running this class on Zoom. I think I'm getting closer to where I want to be. All right, so this is the way I think I can express it as concisely as possible. And I pasted this right below question 1. The mere existence of a zoning ordinance does not render a title unmarketable. I'll say it again. The mere existence of a zoning ordinance does not render a title unmarketable. That's straightforward. But the mere existence of a restrictive covenant does render a title unmarketable. Unless, here comes the big unless, it's disclosed and you take it subject to that covenant. Okay, let me say that again. The existence of a covenant can render a title unmarketable, right? But you can get around it. You can get around it by disclosing the covenant or saying you're taking it subject to all restrictions. This is a standard that always gives students some difficulty. Okay? This is a standard that always gives students some difficulty. I'm sorry, you'll find whenever someone calls me, I ignore it on my phone, that goes right to my computer. I apologize. We presume that every city in the country will have zoning ordinances, right? So just having a zoning ordinance does not make it unmarketable. But if that ordinance is violated, then you have an unmarketable title. Okay, now let's move to covenants. Covenants are more understandable, but they're not quite as common. So in the abstract, if you have a covenant on your home, that could render your title unmarketable. But you can get around it. How do you get around it? You include something in the deed saying that you're taking this property subject to all restrictions, right? Which is, for example, a covenant. So if you disclose it, right, and you say that you're taking it subject to the covenant, then your title's marketable. With me so far? But then here comes a final step that always throws students off. If the covenant's violated, you can't get around it, right? This subject to all restrictions clause does not cure a violation of a covenant. Right, so there's like 3 major standards here, right? The mere existence of a zoning ordinance does not render a title marketable, but the existence of a covenant does render a title marketable. But you can get around that by having a subject to all restrictions clause. I realize it's not straightforward. Does that make sense? And if you go to the Lohmeyer v. Brown, I'll put the link up here for Lohmeyer. That will help clarify, because I think I tried to walk through different combinations. Anthony, was that... No, someone just raised their hand. I can't tell who it was.
It was me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, who's that talking?
Harrison?
Yeah, we say it's me. There's like 60 squares on my face.
Yeah.
Yeah, me. Right. Go ahead.
You said you have to disclose a covenant saying that you're taking it.
Well, I said you can disclose it, or you can have one of these general clauses that say subject to all restrictions.
Okay.
Right, which puts you on notice that there might be restrictions. It's not clear that you have to say specifically what's there, because covenants are a matter of public record. But you at least have to say, I have this and you can take it. Or you say something like, there are restrictions on it. Go figure out what those are. That make sense?
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a tricky standard because there's different ways of getting around the requirement. Okay, Moises, I see your hands up.
Yes, sir. You mentioned that if the covenant is violated, there's no way of getting around that.
That's an unmarkable title. That's right.
Yes, sir.
Like in this case, we had I was expecting a longer question, so I tried to chew in the middle. In this teacher tricks, right? In this case, you have a house that was 1 story, right? And the covenant says you have to have 2 stories, right? That can't be cured by language in your deed. That can't be cured, right? So that's an unmarkable title because the second you walk onto that property, you are now subject to litigation. Okay? Let me address a question someone asked last class. What happens if there's like a very strict covenant that says your grass must be no more than 2 inches, right? And your grass is 3 inches. Does that mean your title's unmarketable? Probably not. You can mow your lawn. I mean, that's pretty easy to do, I think. And you can get around it. So there has to be some sort of, minimum level of problem before you can go ahead canceling your deed. Because canceling a deed is a very big deal. Okay. Allison, was your hand up? I think I saw it a minute ago.
It was the same question that Moses said.
Okay. Okay, very good. All right. Let me ask another question. This is going to be question number 2. And this is going to, I think, segue us into our class for today. Again, true or false? A crack in the foundation of a house is a defect on the title. A crack in the foundation of a house is a defect on the title. True or false? Give you about 30 seconds. About 10 more seconds. And I gotta say, one upshot of Zoom University is you basically have perfect attendance. I mean, I'm looking at like 95% attendance every class. It's amazing. And for a 9 a.m. class, everyone's here on time. In my entire career, I've never had that. Everyone's walking in and they're cranky. There's traffic. There's parking. Okay, I mean, there's some pluses here. I don't want to say that there are lots of minuses, but there's some pluses from my perspective. Okay, so with this one, 70% of you put false. And about 30% put true. All right, the answer here is false. And this is a good way to transition to our class today. The word defect can mean different things in different concepts, right? The same word defect can have completely different meanings in property law. And in our lesson today, the word defect can have 2 different meanings. The first type of a defect is what we studied last class, is a defect on the title. A defect on the title. What you might call a legal defect. For example, a covenant requires a house to be 2 stories, but your house is only 1 story. This was Lohmeyer versus Brown. Here your defect is legal, right? Your title is unmarketable. Why? Because this legal defect exposes the owner to the risk, the hazard of litigation. That's the first kind of a defect, a legal defect. That was our last class. The class today is a little bit different. We're not dealing with a legal defect. We're dealing with a physical defect. For example, a leaky roof, a cracked foundation, maybe a termite infestation, right? These physical defects are significant things that might affect the person's decision to buy the house or not, right? If you knew that there's a termite infection, you may say, you know what, I'll buy a different house. Or if there's a leaky roof, especially, now with the storm bearing down on us, you may not buy the house. Or if there's, a cracked foundation, you don't want your house sinking into the earth, right? There's certain things that are really bad that will discourage you from buying Blackacre, right? These are what are called physical defects. Now, what confuses students on the exam every year is they confuse physical defects with legal defects. And I know the difficulty is using the same damn word, right? Is there a defect on Blackacre? Well, does that mean is there a defect in the title or a defect in the physical property? And my friends, you'll need to figure it out from context. There's no short answer for you. But I can't tell you how many exams I grade year after year where the questions ask me at a defect and they're talking about cracked foundations instead of talking about threats of lawsuits, right? Or I'll give you the better example. Let's say I give you a question on a defective title, right? Defect on title. And people start citing Stambovsky, the haunted house case. I'm like, no, that's the wrong case. That's the wrong case. It's not about defects on the title. That's about defects on the property. Or I'll give you a case about a physical defect, and you're citing Lohmeyer v. Brown, which is the Kansas case. So where this usually burns students and how I can tell they don't really get the distinction is they're citing the wrong sort of cases. They're citing the physical defect for a legal case, or they're citing the legal defects for a physical case. Right, so that's where I catch you, and it will happen to some of you. So I hope we don't, but it happens every year. All right, any questions on that so far? All right, I want to get two pieces of terminology first. So I'm going to give a short answer question. This is something you're supposed to type a few words, maybe a sentence. It limits you to 140 characters, which is basically the length of it's an old tweet. But here's your question. What is a latent defect? And I want you just to type your definition of a latent defect right now. I'll give you another 45 seconds. All right, another 15 seconds. Oh no, I didn't give you more time. Another 20 seconds. I like this. I actually appreciate the character limit because it gets you in the mood of the word limit for the exam. It forces you to put together short, concise rule statements. But that's sort of just meandering on. It actually has some value. I see about 45 people, another 10 seconds. Okay, these questions take a little bit longer. That's fine. And we'll try the word cloud, see how that works. All right. All right, I think I got everyone. All right, let's see what the results are. Generate word cloud. I can't do the word cloud live. Okay. All right, so let's see what people put. Good. All right, good. All right, I think everyone's just more or less on the right path. All right, so let me call on someone next. Who's next here? Is that Madison? I don't hear you, Madison. Who's after Madison, perhaps?
I am.
Okay, there you are, Madison. Thank you so much. We weren't popping up for a second. Okay, what's a latent defect?
This is Mackenzie. I'm after Madison.
Okay, Mackenzie, that's fine. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I put a latent defect is a defect not visible to the naked eye upon a reasonable inspection.
What does the word latent mean by itself? Just you'll see this word in the law in different contexts.
Well, my latent is my undergrad, my major was in forensic science.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's good.
So
yeah.
Latent. Latent to us meant like a fingerprint that's not visible to the naked eye.
Right. The word. No, that's right. Thank you, Mackenzie. So latent usually refers to something that's sort of like hiding or not yet active. Right. It's there, but it's not doing stuff yet. So a latent fingerprint, I guess, would be a good example. A latent defect, I think Mackenzie stated it well, is some sort of physical problem with the property that will not be uncovered by a reasonable inspection. For example, when you buy a house, you're encouraged to get an inspection. They look at the electrical outlets. They look at the plumbing, right? They look at the walls to make sure that there's no, cracks, because that could be a foundation issue. My inspection was not very good. The guy who did my inspection missed a lot of stuff and we got burned for it later. But in theory, you find stuff. But there are some problems that are not going to be uncovered through a reasonable inspection. And the classic example is the crack foundation, right? Why? It's underneath your house. It's hard to see what's underneath your house. There are sometimes signs for crack foundation. So, for example, if you have cracks in your walls, or if you have cracks on your, if you have a patio or a terrace, right? It can suggest the house isn't even, but it's hard to tell. Another latent defect might be a leaky roof. Unfortunately, it's hard to know if a roof has a leak until it rains, and rains hard. I moved into an apartment some years ago when I was clerking, and about 20 minutes after I moved in, a tropical storm blew through, and there was this massive flooding, and my windows started leaking. I was like, oh my God. And it never happened again. It was just this fluke storm that was so huge. Termites might be another latent defect because they're not always noticeable until it's too late, right? But these latent defects are problematic because you can't find them. All right? Okay, who's up after Mackenzie? Madison, are you back?
Does my microphone work now?
Yeah, okay, I can hear you now. Thank you, Madison.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let me ask you the next question.
Okay.
What is a material defect? What does that phrase material mean?
I would say that material is, and I would say like something more substantial or obvious.
That's good. I like the word substantial, but substantial what? What does it mean for a defect to be material? Substantial, fill in the rest of the sentence.
The substantial to the condition of the property, or
What does that mean, substantial to the condition of the property?
that
Substantial what?
substantial problem.
No, not exactly. Samantha?
Hi. Would it be something substantial that would affect the value?
Yeah, that's it. The key word's value. Thanks, Samantha. The key word is value here, right? It's that the defect has to be so substantial that it substantially affects the value of the property. Or maybe stated a different way, the defect is so significant that it might discourage a person from buying the house. So again, like let's say there's a minor defect, I don't know, some of the electrical outlets are broken. Okay, I mean, that's an inconvenience, but you can get it fixed in a few minutes, right? So for a defect to be material, that's to be substantial, has to affect the value of the house to discourage someone from buying it. All right? Why is this important? When we're discussing canceling a contract or rescinding a contract, generally you can only rescind a contract for material defects, right? You can't rescind a contract for minor stuff. right? Again, if you find out that, the toilet's backed up, right? Okay, big deal. You're not going to rescind the contract for that. But if you find out that, the foundation's cracked, or that there's a leak in the roof, or that, there's termite damage, okay, that's a material defect. All right, everyone with me so far? Okay, so we have these two concepts. You have a latent defect, and then you have a material defect. When you combine the two, it's really bad. A latent material defect. Again, a latent material defect, right? Alexa, I think you're next.
Yes.
What happens when you combine those two concepts, when you have a latent material defect? What does that mean, just when you have those three words? It's an important phrase just to get in your head. Latent material defect. When you put those three words together.
Well, I assume when you put latent and material, it just means a defect that you can't see but substantially affects the value of the property.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Alexa. Okay. When you have a latent defect material, it's not visible, and it's not going to be uncovered by a reasonable inspection, but it would affect the value of the house so much that you would want to perhaps avoid buying that property. And this concept of a latent physical defect becomes important in our two cases today. All right, you have a question so far? All right, Ashley, are you here?
Yes.
All right, Ashley, can you tell me, please, what is the doctrine of caveat emptor? Caveat emptor, what is this doctrine?
The caveat emptor translates to let the buyer beware.
Good. What does that mean?
It's an assumption of risk standard.
Oh, I like that.
So,
good. Yeah. Go on.
when you go buy a piece of property, you're assuming the risk and you're kind of on your own.
Okay, good. Just when you say you're on your own, just spell that out for me. What's the meaning on your own?
Meaning that, I guess, if you were to examine or look at the piece of property and you miss something, or you're on your own to kind of fix it. I thought about it as like an as-is almost.
Good. That's very good. That's very good, Ashley. So, have you ever bought an as-is car?
I personally haven't.
No, I know. I have. And it's risky, right? Because with an as-is car, does the seller have any obligation to tell you stuff?
No.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, no, I've bought as-is cars before. It's a very risky proposition. You go to the window and you see the sticker, right? And the sticker says as-is. That's all the seller's going to tell you. It's like, look, you are buying this car. Whatever is on these four wheels, if they're even four wheels, right, that's what you're getting. The caveat emptor doctrine is basically the used car salesman doctrine, right? Where the salesman, the seller, is under no obligation to tell you anything. The seller is under no obligation to tell you anything. You are on your own. Buyer beware. The buyer is to identify any issues, any problems, any defects on the property. Again, we're here talking about physical defect. And I want to stress this point very clearly. Caveat emptor does not affect the legal title. Caveat emptor does not affect the legal title. Caveat emptor only affects the physical defects, the physical problem. Okay? So in states that have the caveat emptor standard, the buyer's on his own. Okay? Now, Ashley, Monique, you here? Okay. Hi, Monique. Hi.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thanks, Monique. Monique, let me ask you a question, please. What's the difference between nonfeasance and malfeasance? Nonfeasance and malfeasance.
Hear me? Okay.
I'm sorry? I don't know if you're having bandwidth issues. Malfeasance and nonfeasance. We'll come back to you. Adam, you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
What's the difference, Adam, between malfeasance and nonfeasance?
So malfeasance would basically meaning, let's say we're talking about the crack foundation. If someone were to, let's say, ask you about, you would have to say like, no, you're doing something. Whereas nonfeasance is more just like not doing anything at all.
Okay, so let me ask you a different way, Adam. Just for the camera's a little crooked. I come to your house to buy it,
Okay.
and I ask you, is there a crack foundation? And you say, no, the foundation is just fine. And there's a crack. Is that malfeasance or nonfeasance?
That would be malfeasance.
Okay, because I'm lying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's an affirmative misrepresentation. Okay? Now let's give you a different scenario, Adam. I come to your house and I ask you, is there anything wrong with the foundation? And you sort of just walk away. You don't answer the question. You don't say anything. You sort of, oh, well, it's getting late. I gotta go. Go get a snack or something, right? Gotta go Netflix, right? Gotta get out of here. Is that malfeasance or nonfeasance?
Perfect example of nonfeasance.
I think so. Why is it nonfeasance?
Because I'm just, playing aloof. I'm just.
Yeah, I think it's actually a closer call, but I think it is nonfeasance. But the easiest example is, there's a foundation, and the buyer doesn't ask, and you say nothing. Okay. All right. Thank you, Adam. Right. So you need to get this difference in your head between malfeasance and nonfeasance, and I think you probably did this in torts and maybe some other classes. Right. The law doesn't like people who lie, but the law doesn't punish people who stay quiet. So you basically talk less, smile more, and no one knows what you're standing for, right? Hamilton. The standard basically is if you keep your mouth shut, you'll get ahead. Okay? But if you lie about it, you're in trouble. Okay, so this becomes the first major exception to the caveat emptor doctrine. Right? With caveat emptor, nonfeasance is okay. You can keep your mouth shut. Chance to see your hand? 1 second. But malfeasance is not okay. Even with caveat emptor, if you lie, if you make what are called affirmative misrepresentations, you're in trouble. If you lie, that's fraud. Right? You can be sued for fraudulent misrepresentation. And more importantly, for our class, you can be sued to rescind the contract, to cancel the contract. Now, in property, I don't care about fraud. If on your exam you're writing about fraud, you're probably writing the wrong thing. That's a contract thing. I don't care. It's not my thing. What I care about is, can you rescind the contract of sale? Can you cancel the contract of sale? That's what I care about. And even in a caveat emptor jurisdiction, if you lie, if you engage in an affirmative misrepresentation, the courts will allow you to cancel or rescind the contract. And you can get back your down payment, your earnest money, whatever 10%, whatever you put down. Okay? Chance, I saw your hand was up. Do you still have a question?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
What happens if you intentionally try to stay ignorant of a defect? As in Texas, you have to do the seller's disclosure. Sometimes you do a contract, the buyer comes in, does an inspection, finds something they don't like, and then says, hey, we're backing out because of the option period. There's probably a defect there, but as the homeowner, you don't want to know about it because then you have to disclose it. Are we going to address that topic at all, or is that?
Well, let me address your question this way. The caveat emptor doctrine has been, I think, weakened over the last several decades, and in some states like Florida, they've expressly abandoned it. But even in states where they haven't abandoned it, it doesn't have as much teeth. And let me explain to you why. When you buy a home, right? When you buy a home in Texas, there's a standard form, right? I linked to it last week by the Texas Real Estate Commission. And there are many, many, many disclosures you have to make, right? There are many disclosures you have to make. You have to disclose termites. You have to disclose lead paint. You have to disclose all these things. What this forces people to do is to not commit nonfeasance. If you have to disclose every little thing about your property, right? If you have to disclose every little thing about your property, you're unlikely to lie about it. So the real estate agents have actually put a lot of pressure on cities to adopt these disclosure forms. So even in Texas with a caveat emptor doctrine, right? Even in Texas, which has a caveat emptor doctrine, it's softened because you always have these massive disclosures you have to deal with. Okay? Chance to answer your question?
Kinda. It was more, as a homeowner, do you know if your house has a foundation issue right now?
Do I know?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe. It's hard to tell.
And so if you sold your home right now, you wouldn't put yes or no on the disclosure. You just put I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you have to... Oh, you're saying, is there an incentive to not know? In other words, if you're selling your house,
the willful blindness aspect of it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, right. I mean, if a person doesn't know, they can't be charged. I don't think there's any obligation if you're selling your house to conduct extensive investigation. So I guess you can stay dumb, I suppose. Yeah, I guess that's right. Okay, thanks, gents. All right, questions so far? All right, now let's walk through the two cases today. The first case is a hoot. Students always either love it or they're afraid of it. I'm not sure which one. Stambovsky v. Ackley. Again, it's like the perfect Halloween case. I'll say at the outset, this case is probably wrong. This is one of those cases where it's almost certain that the court here, reached some very strange result that was not consistent with precedent. And I see you read this for Contracts 1. Yeah, it's a good contracts case as well. But I think it's a useful way to illustrate how the court approaches a concept of a latent defect. It's a fun case. Okie doke. I called on Monique. Do you want to try it now? I think I saw you sign back in.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Okay, I think you were cutting out before. You want to give me please the facts in Stambovsky?
Okay, so the plaintiff was from New York and he went to a small town. And he contracted to buy a house, but then he later found out that it was widely reputed to be possessed of poltergeists.
And by the way, you said widely reputed. Some people say it was haunted. Like, that's a fact. So I won't read anything into your statement. Go ahead.
Okay. So the defendant and their family said that they saw poltergeists multiple times, and it was kind of in the news and magazines that they kind of tried to hype it up as a haunted house.
Yeah.
Plaintiff just didn't know because he wasn't from there. He wasn't a local, and he couldn't readily learn that it was haunted.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you, Monique. So, there are a few facts here that are significant. I think Monique laid those facts out well. The first fact that's significant is that Helen Ackley, who was the owner of the house, knew about these hauntings. She didn't just know about them. She tried to profit from it. Right? She sold her story to Reader's Digest. Now, I'm sure none of you know what Reader's Digest is. This was it was a fairly popular national publication. This little paper thing, you pages, right? You flip it, right? It was a fairly popular publication. And they would actually pay people money, $3,000, for stories of haunted houses and other things. It was a widely read journal. Ackley also bragged about it to the local press, and we know that she had a walking tour where people in the neighborhood would walk by her house, ooh, it's a haunted house, right? It was like a very big deal. So here, I think what burned Ackley is that when it worked to her benefit, she was proud to brag about these ghosts. She was proud to sell these ghosts. But when it worked to her detriment, she did not want to talk about the ghosts, right? She did not want to talk about the ghosts when it was to her detriment. And this is a sort of double standard that courts don't like, right? They don't like when we say, oh, well, when it works my benefit, it's fine. When it doesn't, I'll ignore it. Okay, so that's the first important fact. The second important fact is that Mr. Stambovsky was not from this area. He was from New York City. And you can Google it, but Nyack is, maybe about 2 hours away from the city. Sort of more rural area in New York State. And the court says that there's no obvious way for Mr. Stambovsky to have learned about these things. Now, if he had lived in the neighborhood, maybe it'd be a different story, but he lived quite far away. I'll just pause here and note, Google, I think, probably makes this case a little bit differently, right? Because you can now Google anything, right? And if there's like a property that you want to buy, you're probably going to Google it. And if it shows, ghost house, right? That would come up. This was in the 80s. Things were different in the 80s. There was no Google, right? We didn't have that back then. It was very difficult to research stuff, and there's no easy way to find it. All right. Those are all the things that are specific to this case that sort of, I think, motivated the outcome. But what I want to focus on is, how did the court characterize this defect? Natalie, are you here? Amir, you're next. You hear Natalie?
Hello?
Yes.
Hi.
Right, so how did the court characterize this defect, Natalie?
They characterized it as one that you can't really, I think they said it was,
Well, it's just at the outset, is this a physical defect or legal defect? Let's just get that straightened away.
physical.
Okay, it's a physical defect. How do we know that?
Well, actually, it's more so about the reputation of the house.
Why?
Because this reputation was created by the seller.
Yes, good. That's a very important fact. Thank you, Natalie. Why is it significant that Ackley created this problem? Why do you think that's significant?
It's significant because, well, if Ackley hadn't created it, he wouldn't, the plaintiff wouldn't have known about it, being that he's not from the local area.
Oh, no. But why is it significant that Ackley created this defect, right? In other words, the defect here is the house is haunted. That decreases the value. Why is it significant that Ackley created this defect?
Because,
what do you call it in the law where we say people can't, be rewarded by their own misdeeds? What's that called? It's an equitable concept.
oh, that it's, it wouldn't be equitable.
Right, I know it's not equitable, but what do you call that when one person shouldn't be rewarded for their misconduct? What's that phrase? It's a contracts phrase, I'm sure. I'm sorry, punishing you from last semester.
You don't remember.
Amir, do you have it?
I don't know the phrase, but I know that because she made the defect known, she automatically devalued the property, so she didn't do it. So she engaged in non-feasance.
Right. Well, okay. She engaged in non-feasance. All right. The phrase is unjust enrichment.
Oh, yes.
There it is. Yeah, I knew the second I say you would get it. Unjust enrichment. Thank you. The court here didn't really say that, but that's what's going on. She was profiting off of her misdeeds, and then she was silent about it when it actually mattered. And I think it would be wrong to reward her with the full value of the property when she took the steps that reduce the value of the property. Right? Again, she's the reason why the property is worth less than it is. And then she should not be then rewarded by getting the full value of the property. So I think there's an unjust enrichment element going on in the background. All right. Next, the court says that this defect is latent, right? Amir, let me come back to you. Why is this defect latent?
Because a reasonable person can't find haunted or can't find ghosts.
Good, yeah, just flesh it out. You're right, but why would a reasonable person not be able to find the fact that the house is haunted? I know it sounds like a stupid question, but just spell it out for me.
They didn't properly disclose.
No. Generally, how would a person discover defects?
By getting an inspection.
Okay. And what do you call a defect that can't be revealed through a reasonable inspection?
A latent defect.
Okay. And why can't a person find ghosts through an inspection?
Because you can't see the ghosts.
Yeah, who are you going to call, right? Yeah.
Ghostbusters.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. All right, thanks, Amir. Right, so I think that's what's going on here, right? The court says that this is a latent defect. Now, let's just put aside the insanity of this case for a minute. The court doesn't actually say the house is haunted, right? I don't ask this question. I don't care if you believe in ghosts. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to the court. The reason why is that Miss Ackley was willing to sell the house as if it were haunted. And that's the legal basis, right? The defect was not the ghosts. The defect was the reputation of having ghosts. Everyone see the difference, right? The defect was not the house was haunted. The defect was that the reputation of the haunted house diminished the value. In that regard, this reputation was a latent material defect. The three of them, right? Latent material defect. And Miss Ackley created that reputation by telling to the newspapers. So really, the court's sort of being sarcastic, right? It's not you'd have to hold a seance to decide if the house is haunted. It's you'd have to somehow research the local media to connect that house to the reports. In other words, there's no requirement in this legal standard to actually have a seance with a psychic or a medium or whatever else you want to do. That's actually sort of just like a joke. What's important is, can you determine that the reputation of the house has this problem? And the court says, no, you can't. But here, the court's just being really sarcastic and lots of jokes, lots of terrible puns. I like puns, and these are some really bad puns. Quoting Shakespeare, and just the key to a good pun is it has to be non-obvious. If it's so obvious, you failed. Right? I had one line in my summary, which I might cut out, but it says, Ackley dug her own grave. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. And even then I was on the fence about but the key point here is the information. It's not the actual haunt. And I actually found an article in the Times about this from the period. Ackley claims she saw 3 ghosts, right? The ghost of Christmas. No, not that ghost. But she said she saw 1 ghost floating in her living room. A second ghost went into her daughter's bedroom. And the third ghost saw her son in the basement. Okay. You believe her? I don't. But, people. Yes, Elias, go ahead.
So I understand that because this defect was of the seller's own creation, by putting it out there, that there's no doubt that the seller knew about the defect, so it's malfeasance, but that wasn't required for a malfeasance equitable rescission verdict, was it? Like the fact that the seller had created the issue by publicizing it?
No, I don't think it's required that the seller creates it. I mean, generally a person's not going to start punching holes in the roof, right, to create a leaky roof. That's generally not going to happen. But I think in this case, you have to understand, Elias, that the court felt moved by equity, that this woman was a crook. That Ackley was cheating Stambovsky. And in the law, when the court thinks you're a crook, you're probably going to lose. I think that's why they made such a big fuss about that fact. All right, Farron, go ahead.
So since the court ruled that it was a latent defect because the reputation diminished the value, but to some others, the reputation might have increased the value.
Yeah.
So is this more of like a subjective?
Oh, such a good question. Yeah. The word material, unfortunately, can have both a subjective and objective component. It can go both ways, and I don't want you to get too bogged down in that, but there's a little note in the book about this. Here, I think subjective prevails because Mr. Stambovsky didn't want the house. Farron, I think the way I think about this is if the seller is moving to rescind, that means he doesn't want this, right? So I think in this case, it was subjective standard. And I think, if we polled the class, I won't do it, but if we polled the class of who here would not want to buy a house that turned out to be haunted, I think it would 50-50. I don't know. I used to do the question. I don't want to do it anymore, especially on Zoom. It's too risky. But we may have a Zoom bombing ghost come in. Casper spooks us out. There's another question. Someone dropped out of the queue. Who am I going to call? I don't know. No one's else in the queue. All right. In the end, the court said fairness and common sense dictate an exception, and therefore the doctrine of caveat emptor does not control this case. And again, I don't want you to take the Stambovsky case as like a good statement of the law. In fact, I think it's going to be rare that you actually want to cite this case in the exam. Again, everyone always cites this when we're talking about like a defect in a title, and that's just wrong. But even if there's a defect on what's latent in material, it's probably also wrong because it's just such a bizarre case. Okie doke. Questions on the first case, Stambovsky? It's a fun case. I like it. All right, let's go to the second case. Anthony asked, this was a case of nonfeasance. That's correct. Mrs. Stambovsky did not engage in malfeasance. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ackley engaged in nonfeasance, not malfeasance. Diana, go ahead.
Would you say caveat emptor is a minority view?
I think, as far as I know, Texas still follows it, but I think the book says the majority is becoming the to get rid of caveat emptor. But let me make this point a little more clearly. When we're dealing with real estate transactions, you have residential and commercial. With residential, I think the majority rule is trending towards getting rid of it. But for commercial, you still have it. In other words, business people are expected to have a higher sense of, the higher duty to inspect, if you will, right? And business people, they're at arm's length, are going to be more likely to do their due diligence. So I think I think the book says majority rule for residential, but I think for commercial, I think it's right still caveat emptor. I searched a little bit earlier. As far as I can tell, Texas retains caveat emptor, but it really doesn't make much of a difference because all the disclosures. There's so many damn disclosures you have to do. All those papers you have to sign. That make sense, Diana?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay. Anyone else before we go on to the last case? Okay, no. All right, the last case is from the Florida Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court of Florida. And the nickname of the Supreme Court of Florida is not a very good one. It's Scofflaw. Scofflaw, which means lawbreaker. SCOFLA, Scofflaw. Anyway, there you go. Who am I up to? Presley, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, Presley. You want to give me the facts of Johnson?
Yeah, sure. So the Davises entered a contract to buy the Johnsons' home for about $310,000.
Good.
The Johnsons didn't know the roof was leaking when they sold it, but they represented it to the Davises that there was no problem with anything.
Good. And just let me just pause you. Was this nonfeasance or malfeasance?
Malfeasance?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sorry, nonfeasance.
Which one?
I think it was nonfeasance because they didn't say anything.
Check your notes on that.
Okay.
Was this a case where the seller was just silent?
Gonna say yes.
No. Paul, you
I
here?
don't have it in my notes.
Okay, Paul, you here? This is an important fact. Paul, you here?
they affirmatively represented that there were no problems with the roof.
Is this malfeasance or nonfeasance?
Malfeasance.
Okay, very good. They affirmatively misrepresented. That's lawyer for lied, right? That they lied, right? They said the roof was fine. All right, this is important because on the exam, I'm not going to tell you it was malfeasance. It was nonfeasance. I'll give you a set of facts, and you have to pull from those facts what standard we're talking about, whether it's malfeasance or nonfeasance. So in this case, we have malfeasance. There was a lie, an affirmative misrepresentation about the roof. Okay, it turns out the roof had a leak. There was a huge rainstorm, water gushed in, and then Johnson sued to rescind the contract and get his deposit back. Now, this case should have been really straightforward, Jay. Why was this case, I think, pretty straightforward? Here, Jay? Jay? Naveen, you here?
Yes.
Why was this case straightforward? I think this was should have been a really easy case.
Yeah, basically they're just kind of overturning the.
No, I know they're returning stuff, but just the facts of this case by itself should have been easy. Why is the facts of this case pretty easy?
Because this is just clearly malfeasance.
Good. And what happens with malfeasance?
Malfeasance, even with caveat emptor, is a buyer can rescind their contract.
Very good. Perfect. Thanks, Naveen. Okay, so this was an easy case, right? This was an easy case. You have a caveat emptor jurisdiction. They engage in malfeasance. And they lied about a latent material defect. Right? The defect was latent because you couldn't discern it through an inspection. And it was material because it affected the value of the house substantially, subjectively and objectively. So you lied about a latent material defect. Therefore, Johnson was going to lose. Right? Johnson engaged in malfeasance. This case was easy. But the court didn't stop with simply finding that Johnson engaged in malfeasance. Right? Sarah, what did the court go ahead and do? This is an important decision.
They basically decided not to use the caveat emptor.
They abandoned caveat emptor. How do you do that? How does the court even abandon a doctrine? How does it even work?
They decided that they didn't like it anymore.
Well, be a little more specific. Why do they like it anymore?
I believe they said that, kind of like in the last case, the seller shouldn't be able to use that doctrine to take advantage of another person's ignorance.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Sarah. The court finds, in short, that this doctrine is not fair. Right? This doctrine has deep roots in the case law, but he calls these cases unappetizing. You ever hear a case described as unappetizing? Is there an appetizing case? Is it yummy? It's such a strange word to use. I always jump at that when I read my notes. An unappetizing case that are not in tune with the times and do not conform with current notions of justice, equity, fair dealing, truth, justice, the American way, whatever. But here's the important point, right? All that stuff is just window dressing, but here's the actual policy justification for abandoning caveat emptor. The court says that a seller should not be able to benefit from another's ignorance, right? If the seller knows that there's a problem, and the buyer's unaware, why should the seller be able to benefit from this ignorance? So that's the basic rule, which I think maybe sounds reasonable enough. Then the court notes that in other states, have restricted caveat emptor. And the court says, let me read the sentence, the law appears to be working toward the ultimate conclusion that full disclosure of all material facts must be made whenever elementary fair conduct demands it. And I want to just pause this for a second. The law appears to be working towards an ultimate conclusion. What does that mean? The law appears to be working. Is a law like a fugitive animal running around by itself? Is it a sentient being? Who's moving the law? It's the courts, right? This is one reason why I don't particularly like common law adjudication. Because say, well, the law is moving in this direction. Give me a break. You're moving the law, right? It's the courts that are moving because they don't like it anymore. We should at least be candid about what they're doing. I don't know if the law is moving, trending. These, hashtag, right? People are doing things, and that's why the law is moving in a certain direction. The court here finds persuasive cases from other states like California and Illinois that have eliminated caveat emptor for the sale of residential real estate. Again, I think it's still going to be majority rule for commercial, but I think for residential, it's probably caveat emptor is probably minority at this point. All right, and the court gives this test. Thanks, Cassidy. Where the seller of a home knows of facts materially affecting the value of the property, which are not readily observable and are not known to the buyer. In other words, where the seller knows of a latent material defect, right? That's the key phrase. When the seller knows of a latent material defect, the seller is under a duty to disclose them to the buyer. It's not enough to stay quiet. You have to affirmatively respond and disclose it. None of this mattered for Davis's case, right? Because Johnson engaged in fraudulent concealment. But the court still used this case as a vehicle, that's phrase used, as a vehicle to overturn caveat emptor. Okay. Questions on the Johnson case? Questions in the Johnson case? Okay. All right. Let me wrap up. We'll be done in a minute, and I'm going to put the minute poll on. You can type this whenever you're ready. Today we discussed two primary new concepts: the concept of latent defects and the concept of material defects. Latent defects, those defects that are not easily observed through a reasonable inspection. And material defects are those defects that substantially affect the value of a property. In a jurisdiction with caveat emptor, there's no duty to disclose these latent material defects. But in jurisdictions like Florida and California, where they've abandoned it, you now have an obligation to disclose latent material defects. And the failure to disclose these latent material defects provides grounds to rescind or cancel the contract. Okay. Questions? All right, well, I'll leave the poll running. Please put in your short summary of the case or any questions you have. I do read these carefully. Marcos, go ahead.
Just going through the notes, there was a lot of very specific disclosures that you have to do by state.
Yeah.
Is it important to know all of them?
Not really. No, I don't need to know all of them, but I think what you should know is that states do impose very stringent disclosures, which really softens the need for caveat emptor. It just doesn't have as much juice as it used to. Okay. Diana, go ahead.
I had a question with not material defects. What about defects that are legal defects? Does it not matter because it makes the title unmarketable?
Yes, and don't confuse the two. Whether a title is marketable or not has nothing to do with whether there are defects in the property, right? If you have a one-story house and the covenant says 2 stories, you're unmarketable. And let me make this a different way. A legal defect will generally be discovered not through an inspection, but through a title search, right? If you do research on all the zoning ordinances in a city, you can figure out if there's a legal defect. If you do a title search of all the covenants in a specific lot, you'll find out that there's a defect. So these things that can be discerned if you do your homework.
Okay, so it's more about due diligence than duty to disclose.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way of looking at it, yeah. All right, anything else?
Professor?
Yes, go ahead, Alan.
It's Anthony. For the
I'm sorry. Oh, Alan raised his hand. Alan, you can go first.
Yeah, I have a question. So do we need to take note of the merger doctrine?
Yeah, you know what? I wouldn't worry about it. The book says it's kind of on the downswing. It's not really relevant anymore, and it's not. So I don't spend time on it anymore in class. So I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay,
But-
and then I have one more question.
Yeah.
So on 595, it talked about general warranty deeds, special warranty deeds, and quick claim
We'll
deeds.
get to those later. I promise. Yeah, yeah. But I'll give you a quick 2-second summary. A quick claim deed is like an as-is used car, which means you buy it without any assurances on the title, right? This is about not physical defects, but about legal defects, right? You're not making any assurances. The general warranty deed is like a bumper-to-bumper, 100,000-mile warranty where they insure you that there are no legal defects. But again, these phrases, general warranty, quick claim deed, these concern legal defects and not physical problems. That make sense, Alan?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. And Nancy, I see your hands up as well. Yeah, if you want to speak, just raise your hand. I try to give precedence to those who have their hands up. Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You can hear me. I had to switch to my phone. I apologize.
That's okay.
I just want to make sure I understand this last piece that you spoke about, where caveat emptor doctrine has been abandoned, like Florida and California.
Mhm.
There is an obligation to disclose the latent defects, but where that doctrine stands, like Texas, there's not necessarily an obligation under that doctrine to disclose latent defects, but now there's included in like the sale
Good.
paperwork, there's
Yes.
all of these disclosures.
Perfect.
And that's what's softening.
Perfect summary of the case. Exactly right.
And so then if you don't disclose it in those forms, now you have a case of malfeasance or
Right. No. It's not if say in the form you say that we don't have this problem and you actually have it, that's malfeasance. But let's say there's some obscure, the disclosure forms don't ask, is the house haunted? Right? So in Texas, if you're silent about a haunted house, you're not going to be liable.
Is there a law, just as a side note, in Texas about, houses where there's been some sort of
I don't think there's a law.
special
Some states have this. There was a house a couple years ago. It wasn't in Galveston, somewhere near the Bay. I can't remember, where there was actually like a huge, like it was a multiple family homicide, and then someone tried selling it, and then this was a case a couple years ago. I don't remember what happened to it, but I don't think there's a statute on this to rescind this, to rescind the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if you need to go, that's fine. This is being recorded as well. Anthony, go ahead.
So on the Johnson case, Florida, we're supposed to think of that as a growing majority, or it's still a minority when it comes to
This is a 35-year-old case. I think this is the majority at this point.
Okay.
Yeah,
So then the duty to disclose if the seller knows about it is a majority opinion.
I would say so.
And if the seller is not aware of a latent material defect in this type of state, since he's not aware, can the buyer still rescind the contract if it's discovered?
No, if you're not aware, this maybe goes back to Chance's question. If you're not aware, you're not under an obligation to disclose, right? But if there's if every time it rains you have these buckets of water and you take no effort to investigate, at that point maybe they can impute the knowledge to you, right? If you just see every time it rains you have these massive gushes of water, you never hire a roofer. Well, at that point, maybe you actually know or should have known. So there might be. It's not a strict rule. Did you know? Maybe there's a you should have known standard.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we're good. All right, everyone, enjoy. Stay safe. Don't go outside. Who goes outside anyway, right? But stay home. Stay off the roads if you don't need them, and hopefully we'll be all here safe and sound on Monday. Thank you.